Okay, so I have cut out my fabric backing, so I've got quite a bit of probably 4 or 5 centimeter seam allowance around the edge. I've washed the fabric, I have ironed it, and I also just sewed around the edge with a zigzag stitch because this muslin that you use for baby blankets, which is very soft for the baby, does fray at the edges very easily. So I didn't sew on this edge because this is the selvage and that's not going to fray. So you'll see that I've got the right side of the fabric facing the right side of the blanket, and this is the lower bottom here. That's the top of the blanket there. So I'm going to pin the material and the blanket together up that side and then sew that first. And then I'm going to come back and smooth everything out because the material is not stretchy, but the blanket is. So I like to do it one side at a time. So you do one side, come back, smooth it out, pin the second side and sew that, smooth it out, and the third side. And actually, no, I should be starting down here, I just realized, because I'm going to leave a gap at the end to turn it inside out, and I'll leave it here at the bottom left because that's the bottom of the blanket, and that's probably the least likely place that you'll look and see where my hand sewing is to sew up the gap. So I'll start here. So I'm going to pin along here first of all. Now this is a little difficult because I'm actually holding the phone, so I don't have a camera stand because I'm not a professional. So I will just start by pinning in here near the edge. And I don't want to pin too far in because I've got quite a narrow border. So it'll probably be the equivalent of about here, and I'll be sewing along the edge in a daredevil fashion, hoping to make sure I get the edge, which you could actually, probably better to pin that side maybe, so then you can actually see it. So maybe pin on that side. So I'll show you in a minute as I'm sewing along the seam so you get the idea. It's fairly straightforward. As long as you remember to leave a gap at the end, turn it inside out and hand sew the gap, that's about it. So here we go, I've pinned along here and I'm now going to sew a straight seam. You can of course sew all 4 sides at once if you like. I just like to do it one by one to make sure it's going to be straight and that the seam allowance is even all the way around. So I'm just sewing along the edge here with a straight seam, and I'm just of course pulling out the sewing pins as I go. You see I've left quite a bit of material hanging there. You can cut that off at the end or you can leave it, it's up to you. But I try to sew quite slowly and steadily, just trying to make sure that the blanket and the material are both very smooth and even. So I'm going to sew that to the end. Right, so I've sewn one side, and you'll see the reason that I like to do one side at a time is that everything kind of moves a bit. So I like to pull the material, straighten it out, and then I pin the next side and sew the next side. So as I said, you can do it all at once if you like, but now I will do the second side, the third side and the fourth side, and when I next see you, we'll get to the point where I've left about a 20 to 30 centimeter gap here, which is going to be where we turn it out inside out, and then we're going to hand sew the gap. See you after that. Okay, so now I've sewed all the seams and I've got this 10-inch 25 centimeter gap here, and how am I going to do this one-handed? So basically I'm now turning the blanket inside out. It's very difficult because I don't have a tripod, so I'm going to show you the beginning of this and you may have to imagine the rest, and then I will show you the finished product in a minute once I've turned it inside out through this hole. Yes, I need a tripod. Any donations gratefully accepted. Okay, here we are, we're inside out. You can see this is the blanket, this is the fabric. I often stick my fingers or something sharp to make the corners come out completely. Then you're going to straighten it all out. We will be pressing this in a minute. That's my final step, is giving it a bit of a press at the seam there with the iron. You could top stitch if you really wanted to. So now you have this gap here. I have actually cut off a bit of excess fabric that I had there, and then you may want to redo the fraying, or you may just ignore it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand sew this gap closed, and then all we have to do is give it a bit of a steam press from the fabric side. I wouldn't say to iron directly on the crochet. I would never say directly iron on the crochet. You can steam it, don't put the iron down on it. So I'm going to hand sew this. I'll show you how in a sec, and then press, and we're nearly done. Right, so I've threaded my needle and I've tied a knot and started here to sew up the hole. Now what I'm trying to do, I've just noticed how peculiar the end of this needle is, but please ignore that. What I'm trying to do here is tiny little stitches that you can barely see. So literally I'm just doing what some may call whip stitch. No idea what I call it. I just call it hand sewing. And I know that all I do is just put it in like that and put it across. I guess you could machine sew this, but somehow I just prefer hand sewing here. You could top stitch it, I guess, with the machine, and then that would have the same. That would probably have an even better effect. It might hold down the edges better. So this is just how I do it. You can do it anyway. So ideally it's kind of invisible, almost invisible, and you just go along here, and in a minute I'm going to show you the final blanket and give it a little press, and we're good to go. So happy hand sewing, or whatever you choose to do. The color of the cotton was a little hard to choose, but I decided to go with this sort of a beige, which is the color of the yarn, even though it doesn't really go with the green on the back, but hopefully it will blend in okay. So tiny stitches, sewing away. See you when it's all finished. And finally, here we are, just pressing with the iron. Oops, a little hard one-handed, and you'll see to make that edge smooth all around. And then I'll show you the final blanket. Now here we are after the pressing, and we have finished our blanket, and I think you'll agree that if you're giving it as a present, it's definitely worth doing this fabric lining. It just looks so much better, and it's really soft on the baby's skin. Thank you for watching.